David Falk, sports agent, a legend to me, is joining us. David, you're a busy guy. Thank you very much for taking time for our show today.
My pleasure. I watch it from time to time when you're on the around the horn and stuff, so enjoy it.
Let me start with this. I watch Jerry Krause, and I cannot believe, it drives me nuts, that it was almost a contentious relationship with Michael. Now, is that being exaggerated in this documentary, or was it contentious often for Michael's time in Chicago?
I mean, Jerry was an insecure guy, and I think the person who best described Krause in a nutshell, in one sentence, was David Halberstam. I think is the greatest author in the last 50 years. He wrote a book about Michael, and he said Krause probably deserved more credit than he was given and a lot less than he asked for. And because Jerry was insecure, he constantly tried to make it a point that it was the organization winning, not the players.
Yes.
And the irony is the owner of the team, Jerry Reinsdorf, I have an incredible respect for, fun. I really like him. He's really smart. He owns two teams, the White Sox and the Bulls. And he really, in my opinion, used Krause as a filter, just for exactly how you described it. He'd get people so exasperated that by the time they went to the Court of Appeals, which is him, they were way more malleable. So I tried very hard. I rarely dealt with Jerry Krause. I mean, I did all my deals at Reinsdorf. We had a very close personal relationship, and it's a mark of respect when you have top players. You don't usually deal with the GMs, you deal with the owners.
Now, Michael had a long contract when he first got into the league, and many people said he and Pippen were both underpaid. Did you ever at one point try to go in and renegotiate that?
Well, Michael's first contract was done by my boss, Don Odell. Even though I was the head of basketball, he didn't ask my opinion. He asked me to join him for the negotiations. Sort of incredible. It's like having Bill Belichick on the 1 yard line with one play left in the Super Bowl. He calls a timeout, and he doesn't ask his offensive coordinator, hey, thinking of running the 35 belly flop, Z. What do you think? He just runs the play and loses. So Michael was behind the eight ball from day one, as were most of the players in that generation.
Yeah.
Grant Hill, Isaiah. How about Magic signing a 25-year deal for $25 million 1 year before Patrick signed a 10-year deal for $3.2 a year? So they were both underpaid. Michael redid his deal after the fourth year. He became by far the highest paid player in the league. I told him, no matter what you sign, it will never reflect your value until you become a free agent. Most players in his generation, virtually every one of them, never became a free agent. They all wanted security, and security has a price. So Michael finally got, more what he was worth in 1996 when he became an unrestricted free agent. And he could have signed for $30 million. He could have signed for $80 million. I mean, he was worth whatever. You could make an easy argument he was worth $100 million, but they couldn't have a good team. And so the point of his second contract for me was to put him in an arena where no one else could go in. He was there by himself. There was Garnett making 21 and Michael making 30. And it took 17 years for someone to hit $30 million after he signed that contract in 1996. So it stood the test of time.
Yes, it did. David, was it David Falk, sports agent? David, Nike doesn't have a salary cap. So was it easier to negotiate with Nike, even though the money was so massive? I mean, listen, it comes down to math. Michael was selling so many. He still sells more shoes than anybody else. Were the Nike negotiations, because of what you were making, which is still today a bloody fortune, were those ever contentious?
No, because the guy, Rob Strauss, was the head of marketing for Nike, and he and I, by 1984, developed an extremely close relationship. We basically didn't have negotiations. I would tell him what I thought was fair. He trusted me. There was very little back and forth. And, the irony of the Air Jordan deal, it's probably the best deal ever made, and it's probably the worst deal ever made, because no one had a clue, including Nike, that you could sell $100 million worth of shoes for a rookie in his first year.
Yeah.
Their goal, as I've said on a number of interviews all over the Twitter world, their goal was to get to $3 million by like 1987. If I knew we were going to sell $100 million in year one, I would have asked him for $1 a year and a 50-50 royalty, and he'd be making $1 billion now. So, a lot of this, you just didn't know it could exist.
Right.
No player before him had their own shoe. Magic didn't have a shoe. Bird didn't have a shoe. Doc didn't have a shoe. Isaiah didn't have a shoe. Jabbar didn't have a shoe. No one had their own shoe in basketball. The only player that I could remember outside of tennis or golf that had a shoe was O.J. Simpson with a really small company called Spot Built that we actually talked to for Michael. So, the deal was groundbreaking, more in terms of disproving the notion that a player had to be in the league 5 years and establish himself before he could become marketable. Michael broke all the boundaries, and today all the young players that want to have a brand, even though I think 99.9% of them don't remotely even have a brand, and they spend oodles of dollars with these huge agencies trying to, do their social media consulting. Michael, you said Michael sells more than every player who has their own shoe combined.
Wow.
But right now, probably times two. He sells twice as much as Under Armour's whole company.
Wow. Do you remember where you were? Long drive at home in your office. The moment you found out Michael was going to play baseball.
I was home. He called me. It was a two-pronged attack, if you will. He called me at home on a Saturday, about 11 in the morning. And you have to understand our relationship. Michael is an amazingly great friend, the best. I mean, he's an amazing friend. He's loyal. He's sensitive. He's considerate. He really makes you feel special when you're his friend. But he loves to tweak you. So he called me at home and he said, hey, just want you to know I'm going to retire. And I knew he expected me to come right back and say, oh, God, you can't retire. You're 29. You're at the top of your game. And I fought all my basic human instincts to respond, just do what I rarely do. People know me say this is rare. I just shut up for about 30 seconds. And I said to him the following, okay, I said, what are you thinking of doing? He said, I want to play baseball, which, I wasn't surprised because he had talked about it with his dad. I wasn't surprised that would be what he would do if he ever retired. And so I said to him, it's the American dream to work really, really hard at something, become the best at it, make a ton of money. And when you make the ton of money, at that point, you can do whatever the hell you want. You can retire, you can play golf, you can go to the Bahamas, you could teach. And if what satisfies you at this point is baseball, go for it. I think it takes an incredible amount of courage, Colin, for a player who's the best in the world, maybe at any sport, but certainly at his sport, to give it up in his prime and to go play something he hasn't played since the junior high. Could you imagine if you went to a Major League Baseball player today who's 29, who played JV basketball in junior high, and said, we're going to put you in the G League tomorrow. Do you think you can average 15? Do you think you can average 15? We'll give you 1 month to train. Do you think you can average 15 points? And so when he batted 200 in AA ball, it was eye-popping. And, he wasn't Derek Jeter, but, he also hadn't played baseball probably in, 15 years.
No, I led my show today saying I think he's a little better at baseball than I gave him credit for. I told my kids watching this documentary, I said the important thing to remember is Oprah got fired and Michael Jordan got turned down and tackled for years by Detroit. That even for the greats, Michael had good parents, he had good representation, he had a great coach, he had, handsome, stylish. And, Adidas and Converse are like, nah. I'm like, life is hard. And one of the hardest parts, and I've defended Michael on this, is the gambling stuff. Was there ever a moment, David, that you called him and just offered concern? You'd heard something and thought, the stories were out there about he liked to gamble. Did it ever concern you?
Well, first of all, my dad was a compulsive gambler. He was a butcher. My dad never finished high school, probably never earned $30,000 in his life, and went to the track almost every day, hoping he hit the exacta and he wouldn't have to work anymore. So I'm very, very sensitive to gambling. I think when Michael gambles and he's, losing $50,000, that'd be like you, playing 9 holes or betting me a nickel. I mean, it's irrelevant. Was I concerned? Of course I was. I was concerned more about the impact on his image because he's squeaky clean. Doesn't come from good parents. He comes from amazing parents. His parents are amazing people. And if you want to know in the doc where he got that incredible competitive fire, just look to Dolores and James. They constantly urged him to continue to get better, not as a player, as a human being, to constantly improve, to read, to broaden your interests. They're really amazing people. And he played for Dean Smith at Carolina, who's clearly one of the greatest college coaches of all time. he wasn't like a solo pilot at Carolina. He played with James Worthy, who was the number one pick in 1982. He played with Brad Daugherty, who was the number one pick in 1986. Sam Perkins, who was the number 4 pick. He had really good players on the team, and he wasn't the best player of his college team at the time. That was clearly James Worthy. He was the MVP when they won the title in New Orleans. So Michael has amazing values. He's got a strong foundation. I've said this hundreds of times. There may be players that come along that are more talented than Michael Jordan. There may be players that are better shooters than Michael Jordan. I don't think there'll ever be another player that has the fortuitous mix of the parental background he has, the pedigree at North Carolina with a coach who drove him to become not only the best offensive player, but one of the greatest defensive players in the history of the game. And to have the intelligence and the drive that he has, it's just a unique combination. I've had hundreds of players, great players, representing some great coaches like John Thompson, Coach K. You know, I don't think there'll ever be another player in the NBA like Michael Jordan.
David Falk joining us. You know, Michael he was, and I don't know if it would be different today with social media, but I do believe if you have strong parents and strong foundational systems, you're less inclined to be concerned about what others outside of that sphere think of you. And, you know, Michael would give a donation to a political person, but he didn't want to go public with it. Do you think Michael would be allowed today, with the world we live in, to be as, you know, ambivalent about politics, or as his agent, do you think you would perhaps prod him to do political activism at some level?
First of all, the answer to the second question is no. I think that every person has to choose the extent that you want to be involved, whether it's politics, charity, you know, good works. It's got to come from inside. And Michael was involved in politics. He just didn't discuss it publicly. He supported a lot of people. He gave millions of dollars to different candidates, different causes. You know, he just didn't do it publicly. And no matter what he did, there'd be a group of people that said he should have done more. Maybe people think he should have done less. And, you know, there's a great quote, to thine own self be true. You've got to do what works for you. Now, I can tell you personally, having been sort of in the middle of of the eye of the hurricane for many years with the kind of clients I had, you know, no matter what I did, I had a group of people that would always tell me, you're too greedy, you're too short-sighted. I didn't really give a damn what they thought. I had my own values. I was doing what I thought was right for my clients. And you know you're going to get criticism. And when I was about 35, John Thompson, who's my mentor, and he's my male mentor. My mom is my mentor, Pearl Falk. John is like my male mentor. I love the man. He's taught me more than any man I've ever met in my life. And he called me in his office and said, son, you have a very serious problem I'd like to discuss with you. I got really, really nervous. I don't know where he was going. I said, really, what is that? He goes, do you want people to like you? I said, of course. It's a very basic human instinct. He said, son, when you walk into an owner's office, you ask that guy to pay $100 million for a hip-hop guy like Allen Iverson, he's going to hate your guts. And if that bothers you, quit the business. What you should worry about is that your clients like you and that the people you're working with respect you. And that was like amazing in its simplicity. You know, I took that advice to heart. And, you know, like I'm not going to quote you the whole thing, but there's a famous quote from Teddy Roosevelt. It's not the critic that counts. It's not the man who points out how the strong man stumbles or where the doer of deeds could have done the better. The credit belongs to the man in the arena whose face is marred by dust and sweat and blood, who strives valiantly, etc. That's Michael. And, you know, and he's got to do what he thinks is best, not what 25 different people tell him he should be doing. And if he didn't do that, he would never have been as successful as he had if he wasn't grounded and had his own guiding principles. And whether it happened in the 80s, the 90s, 20 years from now, or 50 years ago, really doesn't matter the time and the social media. What matters is what your values are.
How did you, when you recruited Michael as an
Stop. We didn't recruit Michael. There was no recruiting back then. I mean, today, the agent business is an utter cesspool in basketball. It really is. And there are rules, but the union does not enforce the rules. They know everyone's cheating. They know that big companies are representing players and coaches, which is a direct conflict in management. When Michael became an owner in Washington, I had to step down as his agent. Do you think I wanted to do that, step down from representing the GOAT? Those are the rules. And so in the day, at the top schools of the country, North Carolina with Coach Smith, at Georgetown with John Thompson, at Duke with Coach K, at Indiana with Bobby Knight, Rick Pitino, there was no recruiting allowed. If Dean Smith would say to you, if you tell me that you were driving in Wilmington, North Carolina, you bumped into Dolores Jordan at the Red Lion food store, you're out. Don't say you're sorry. Don't say you didn't know you're out. No contact whatsoever. You could have 1 hour. At the end of the time, he'd invite 3 or 4 groups in, that's all. There were very few groups that were, like today, there are really very few groups that are qualified to do it. And he picked the top 4 or 5 agents, and he brought them in, and he would recommend to the players who he thought was the best for them. And it was like the Pope speaking. That's how we got Michael. We did no recruiting whatsoever.
I could sit and talk to you forever. I don't know if you ever get to Los Angeles. I'd like to take you to dinner and just listen to you for about 6 hours and ask you 100 questions. David,
one of these days, I'm going to get off my ass and do my own. My younger daughter, Jocelyn, lives in Brentwood. She works for Wondery, which is a podcast company, and I've been talking about 4 or 5 different groups, talking to one at 3 o'clock. I love doing this because it's fun. And talking, you have to understand, I don't think there'll ever be an agent in the Hall of Fame, but representing Michael Jordan and Patrick Ewing back-to-back, for me, is like being in the Hall of Fame. I mean, there's no greater honor if you're an agent than to represent the greatest player who ever lived for the entirety of his career. And there aren't enough words in the English language for me to thank Michael for supporting me, staying with me the whole time, for his loyalty, his trust. I mean, he allowed me to become who I became, and it spoke volumes when you said Michael Jordan's lawyer agent. I mean, that's the greatest. It's the greatest. You don't need social media. You don't need social media to promote that. You don't need Twitter or Instagram. Everyone in the world knew that I represented. I'll tell you, last thing, I'll let you go. I went to China in 2011 with one of my clients, Evan Turner, to do a promotional tour for a shoe company, Li Ning. And he did about 8 stores. I was getting so bored. And so I just walked out on the street, sat down on a park bench, just to wait for him to come out of the store. And this young kid, about 13 years old, walks up to me and says to me, "Excuse me, are you Michael Jordan's agent?" Now, he didn't ask me, "You Evan Turner's agent," because he happened to be there. And that's Michael. That's not me. That's Michael's power. I mean, Michael is so well known and revered that, just being on his team is the best honor. It doesn't matter whether you're a starter or a reserve. Doesn't matter how much credit. See, what Jerry Krause never learned, Colin, is that he eventually had 6 rings. If he had never said a word, all the bullshit he said about organizations win and how great his coaching staff is, it's just hilarious. He just said nothing. The only 2 people remotely in that time period who had 6 rings were Red Auerbach and Pat Riley. He was in one of Michael's books, he was rare air. And the more he asked for the credit, the less people wanted to give him the credit. And I learned that, when I started working for Michael, I'd been in the business 10 years already. I'd represented James Worthy, Phil Ford, a lot of great Carolina players. I represented John Thompson. I'd been a junior agent for Arthur Ashe and Stan Smith in tennis. And I was as cocky as you could imagine when we did Brand Jordan and we did McDonald's and Coca-Cola and Chevrolet and, Upper Deck, and we're doing, Electronic Arts. I mean, we were freaking killing it. We were doing things no one had ever done before. And I was unbearably cocky. But after a couple of years, it hit me that, wow, Michael can have anyone in the world represent him. He can have the biggest law firm, biggest accounting firm, biggest PR firm. He could have William Morris, a big Hollywood agency. He could have anybody. But he had me, and I became happy to be on the team and stopped trying to tell him, what I was doing. I think your body of work speaks for itself.
What a pleasure this has been. David Falk, don't go into the podcast business. Just come on to my show once every couple months, and we'll be good. You'll be happy with that. It'll be just a nice life.
A lot less work, right?
David, thank you so much.
No, it was a lot of fun. I enjoyed it.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for watching. Subscribe here to get the latest from the show. Also, be sure to check out more of the best clips from The Herd or go watch a few segments from other shows on FS1.